Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, back again with Carsten Tams and our continued exploration of how to improve your overall ethics and compliance training. Today, in episode 4, we take up Gamechanger number 3, making ethics and compliance learning social. Carsten, first of all, welcome back.
Good to be back, Tom. I really enjoyed the series so far.
Well, Carsten, social learning refers to learning from others, with each other, about each other, to each other, inbound, outbound, collaboration. Maybe if using that as a jumping off point, what does social learning theory tell us? And then perhaps we can go from there to what does it tell the compliance professional?
Hmm. I love how you framed the social learning as learning with each other, from each other, about each other. Uh, Reminds me of this, what is it, for the people, by the people, etc. Maybe there's something to that. What is social learning and social learning theory? Let's quickly start with that. There are various perspectives on that. Very famous in educational science is something called social constructivism, or the socio-cultural theory of development, which was formulated by a Russian psychologist called Lev Vygotsky. I believe he published in the late 20th century, the late 19th century. And so he, to put it crudely, he argued that people learn a lot through cultural interaction and osmosis. And one obvious example, for instance, is learning our native language, right? We just pick it up simply by being around people, listening, hearing them speak, and eventually starting to participate in that conversation. And that's how we learn it. It's profoundly social. And very relevant from an ethical point of view is also how we learn social norms, that we learn, and social skills. We acquire ethical values very much like we acquire language through observing behavior around us, seeing how people interact and respond to each other with approval, with disapproval, and what have you. So the acquisition of social norms, ethical values, is very much a result of a social learning process as well. And then there is also a very famous Albert Bandura social learning theory, also called vicarious learning. We touched on that in the last episode also. So Bandura, he really emphasizes the idea that a lot of learning consists of observing and emulating others, imitating them, observing their role model behavior, and he calls that vicarious learning. And we mentioned self-efficacy, and there are also some. So self-efficacy, again, picking up on last episode, is this idea that we are confident in our ability to produce a desired outcome. So in ethical terms, for instance, we are confident in our ability to speak up about a concern we have about ethical conduct. If that efficacy is high, we are more likely to speak up, and we are more likely to do well at speaking up and to succeed with speaking up. And there are two sources he identifies that promotes self-efficacy that are social in nature. And one is called vicarious mastery experience. He always has a way of, finding fancy words. But this is essentially me observing Tom speaking up and Tom being successful, changing a decision as a result of his speaking up that could have been problematic. So now I see Tom do it, and I think for myself, well, if Tom can do it, then I can do it too. So this is vicarious mastery experience. The other one is social persuasion. When Tom comes to me and says, Carsten, I believe you can, you can speak up, you have what it takes, you got this. Go into that meeting and share your concern. So this is called social persuasion, and it's another source of self-efficacy. So again, Albert Bandura emphasizes this idea that social learning is very much social.
Karsten, it strikes me that this type of learning, I'm going to say it really moves from training, formal training, and even formal communication to almost a cultural underpinning of an organization. And you can either work to change or reinforce a culture by having this type of social interaction. Would that be a fair understanding or even a fair assessment of this concept?
Mm, Absolutely. I think there are um, two conclusions or insights that we can draw from this. And one has to do with learning or training more narrowly defined. But then there is another conclusion that has to do with what you are pointing to. And that is the idea that, we can, a lot can be learned and should be learned about ethics in social context. So we can, if we create a social context in which people do something ethical, then this will be an opportunity for them to learn about ethics. So, for example, if a team leader, as part of their Monday morning weekly team meeting, in safety management, that's a thing. For instance, they have a safety moment. So as part of their meeting, they say, they bring up a safety issue. Maybe it is somebody talks about a safety hazard that they have come across in their work, and they point it out and how they addressed it. Or it could be, maybe they share an idea for how safety could be improved. And of course, you could do something similar for speaking up about ethics. You could make it a weekly part of your social interaction. And as a result, people would learn a lot about ethics. Um, uh, and the other thing is the second or the first that I mentioned has to do more with learning in the narrow sense of the term or training. That means, a lot of our ethics training and compliance training these days is a rather lonely affair. It happens in the interaction between me and the computer screen, typically, very often, right? Particularly if you work in an office environment, and there is not really much of a social dimension there. But there are a lot of things, and I think that's a very important point I want to make today. There are some things, some learning, some insights that are absolutely vital for behaving ethically, doing ethical things in organization that can only be learned in a social setting. And I would love to give a few examples.
Please
Um,
do.
yeah. Um, so one thing, of course, are what's called social, emotional, interpersonal skills. So this includes, for instance, how do I handle difficult conversations? How do I resolve conflicts in interactions with other? Also, things that come up in as ethical skills is speaking up about concerns or listening to divergent perspectives and encouraging divergent perspectives. So these are social, emotional, interpersonal skills. And you can learn them, I guess, by opening a textbook and reading about them. But if you learn those in a social setting through interaction, in the context of interactions, it will generate a much deeper uh, learning experience and will be more effective. Uh, However, um, then there are a few other things that I want to highlight, and I would maybe summarize them as social capital that is built as people um, learn about ethics through social interaction. So imagine a situation where 3 to 5 people sit around the table and discuss how they could address an ethically challenging situation. For example, they've learned that their team leader is about to make a business decision that is highly problematic. Maybe it has to do with wining and dining a potential customer way too lavishly, and they think this could really get the company in hot waters. How can they proceed and correct that planned course of action? They consider what ethical commitments of the company are at stake here. What actions could we take? What resources are available in our immediate environment at the corporate level, the ethics department, the legal department? Who do we turn to, etc. And as they problem solve, they talk, they discuss, they prioritize, they weigh their options, etc. And in this process of interaction, a few things occur. For example, people learn, they receive evidence that they are not the only ones caring about ethics at work. They see that the colleagues that they're interacting with seem to share a commitment to ethics in the workplace. They also see that people have different insights, they have different experiences, they have divergent ideas, and from this diversity of ideas and by combining them, people craft a good solution. So they have a lived experience of the fact that often, when a situation seems hopeless or we don't know how to respond to it, we can find solutions by combining our resources, combining our intelligence, our ingenuity, and find a path forward. We can also learn that we can possibly rely on each other in the future. We don't have to walk it alone. That there are others that might be willing to give advice, to be a mentor, to be an ally, to support us in our advocacy. So these are a few examples of evidence that we can receive in a social learning environment that we cannot receive when we interact on our own with a textbook, a video, or an e-learning module. So this is kind of the social capital that accrues in this process, and this capital, this trust that we have, this collective efficacy, etc., I believe is incredibly important in determining whether people have the courage to stand up and speak up, whether they have the courage to act ethically and turn to the ethics and compliance department or not. So I think these are key benefits of a social learning experience.
Carsten, I'd like to take things a little bit different direction, which is the following. I've been in companies where we had a safety moment for every meeting. And I've been in companies where you had to do a personal safety self-assessment. And in the meeting context, I would sometimes hear, well, we've gone through everything. Now we're talking about don't leave the coffee pot on when there's no water in there. And my response was, think about how deeply we have discussed safety that we've gotten down to whether a coffee pot should be on. And that when you have that kind of intensive dive into safety, safety has become a conscious part of the organization. And the second one is an office worker, sort of working in cube world, who was told to assess his personal safety. And he said, and this was my uncle, and he was complaining, well, I thought about backing my chair up. And how should I do that safely? And how stupid is that? And I said, well, number one, if you back into somebody who's walking by, how stupid is that? But number two, what happens if your back legs of your chair catch on the carpet and somehow it pivots up and you go spilling backwards? So why don't you think about, lifting yourself a little before you scoot your chair back? And that to me also drove home the message that it can be something as simple as scooting your chair back, but just a moment's reflection on how to do that safely. And I just wanted to get your opinion on really those two levels of detail around safety. And can we get to those levels of detail around ethics?
Yeah, I love this, Tom. I think, it's the key. One thing that I think we have today is this idea that there's work over here and there's ethics and ethics learning over there. And my personal work is somehow not connected to ethics. It's like, and those minute things or things that seem minute don't matter. But I think what you really want for ethical resilience is that that you get people to really internalize or grow that awareness for the ethical dimensions of their personal work. And so this is where some of these details come in. And I also don't think that you ever run out of meaningful ways to discuss safety in a team or ethics. For instance, you can say, of course, it can be about risk or hazard, but you could invite each member of a team, for instance, this Monday, Carsten talks about, ethical risks that, he goes through our code of conduct and says, I'll pick 3 things that I think most apply to my work. I'm going to look at the code of conduct with the question in mind, which of the topics addressed here have a strong bearing on my work. And if I work in human resources, for instance, and deal with a lot of personal data, I might pick data privacy. And if I work in sales, then maybe facilitation payments are a more relevant topic for me. So everybody has a somewhat different risk profile, and then you take turns and you follow that up with a short Q&A. And this process, the social process of people reflecting on their personal risk and then talking about it, I think it can go a long way in creating this, instilling this sense, this ethics actually relates to my work, just as, and I think your example is great, how we get up out of our chair, it can be a safety issue, or those cables trailing over the floor, electric cables, they are a trip hazard, I'm sorry, or the wet floors, etc. And it's important to take these things seriously. I'm a little skeptical about the, what's that theory called? That stealing a pencil is the first sign of a huge corruption scandal looming. But having said that, people caring about the everyday ethics, also the small things, that's important, because otherwise you think, ethics is something that happens in the ethics department.
Well, Carsten, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode, but I hope our listeners will join us for our 5th and final episode for Gamechanger number 4 in ethics and compliance training, of making compliance training fun. Carsten, I can't wait.
Likewise, Tom. See you soon.